certainly want to welcome all of you here to the Managing Replacement Dairy Herd, sponsored by the University of Illinois Dairy Team, Dr. Mike Hutchins, Dr. Dick Wallace, and myself, Dave Fischer. And the rest of the program will be presented in the form of the PowerPoints that you'll see here. The question and answers will do follow. And I think we'll get started. And so to introduce the first slide here, I just want to comment that there's been a lot of renewed interest in raising dairy replacements, certainly because of higher costs to raise these heifers, as well as the increased demand for higher milk production on these younger cows as they enter the herd, as well as trying to maintain some longevity. So certainly that kind of leads us into our first part here. Whenever we talk about a heifer program or a lactating program or a herd health program, we have to talk about what are our goals. And I just want to stress a few goals here that I think everyone should be looking at, and that is certainly keeping the calves alive. 95% the survival rate from birth to calving certainly is an awesome goal. And hopefully many of you as consultants and or producers and educators have been able to strive amongst the dairy producers in your area for that 95% survival rate. That's not easy. That's not going to be easy. And again, another goal would be to have the heifers grow well enough so that they're able to be bred. And I suggest 60% of mature weight, but in reality, people always tend to look at months. And I think I want to suggest throughout the day here that we're looking at size versus age is going to be the predictor of how we handle our goals in our management program. The other goal that I would suggest that we like to make sure that we can give the calf in at 23, 24 months of age, not too fat, body condition score of about 3.5 as we will look at it. And so that means if we're looking at a large bred, our Holsteins, Brown Swiss, they're going to have the average daily gain of about 1.8 pounds per day, and our Jersey's about 1.4 on the average. And of course, we're suggesting that means about a 1,250 pounds post-calving weight on my Holsteins. Now keep in mind, that's post-calving. Post-calving means we've already lost that weight of the calf and the weight of the placental fluids, which may be up to 130, 140 pounds. And so if we're talking about weight as a springer, we're looking at somewhere around 1,375, 1,400 pound Holstein springer. But again, we do suggest that we have to be monitoring our weights in order to know where we're at on that. Well, let's take a look then. If we talk about keeping those calves alive, what are our dairy producers doing throughout the United States? And many of you are familiar with the NAHMS data, and this is the National Animal Health Monitoring System, where they'll survey 17 of the major dairy states, and they just completed that in 2007. And you can see here, they're showing a 7.8, almost an 8% average death loss on heifers born alive. And so when I talked earlier about a 95% survival rate, right here, we need to really focus in on how do we reduce this 8% average death loss on that pre-weaning mortality. And this here, 7.8%, 8% is death loss considering calves that are born and are still alive at 48 hours. So stillbirths do not fit into this category. Matter of fact, you may see 6 to 7% stillbirths in the dairy industry. And so this here is talking about 8% in the pre-weaning mortality. And there's no doubt, a large percent, almost 60%, is the scours, diarrhea concern, and respiratory problems come in. So our housing has certainly an effect on that. But our major cause or concern is the scours and diarrhea. So we're going to give some real discussion on colostrum management in order to prove the point that we can maintain low mortality rates. In order to get things started, though, we do need to make emphasis that it goes without saying that sanitation and dry conditions, dry calving areas is a must. We certainly will prevent a number of problems if we could start off with a good, well-bedded, well-cleaned, dry, comfortable area for the cow to calve in. And then, of course, following that, it's going to be very very crucial to have an excellent colostrum management program along with a calf hood vaccination program. And we're going to have Dr. Wallace discuss that calf hood vaccination program a little bit later in the program. I thought this here PowerPoint, this slide brings home the point that we talk about how do we manage this calf once the heifer is born. And this here, Hugh Chester Jones from Minnesota put this together for a 4-state proceedings that we had back in 2003. But you can see that the numbers and suggest that as we leave the heifer or the calf with the dam, we increase our chances of that calf not surviving. And so it really does make sense, if you think about it, that all the problems that we get with calf morbidity, calf mortality, comes perhaps in how much bacteria, how much problems are picked up already in the calving pen. So if we can move that calf away quickly as possible, as you can see, we can reduce our mortality rate quite significantly. Here again, we ask the question, what are our dairy producers in the U.S. doing? And going back again to the NAHMS report, it is suggesting here that about 65%, 66% of all calves are removed immediately before nursing. And I think that's a real plus. And I think that's a very, very important aspect to make. Now, the downer side is there's still 1/3 of the dairy heifers or dairy calves that are left with the dam longer and even allowing them to nurse before moving out of the calving area. And again, we're going to talk about colostrum management and how important it is to pull the calf away from the dam as soon as possible. Now, certainly, perhaps some of our PETA people may suggest that we are hurting the calf by taking it away from its mother, cozy, snuggly little mother so soon. But I think we've got a lot of science to prove that we can improve that calf's health and calf mortality by removing it early. Well, let's get started. I mentioned colostrum management is going to be very, very important. And there's no doubt about that. And I think many of you online here have seen the quality, timing, and quantity, the QTQ, as being the acronym that's very important as far as getting that calf off to a good start. There's no doubt that quality of colostrum, it has to be a thick, creamy, free from blood and blood clots. Certainly, that is one sign of quality. The timing is going to be very, very important, and we suggest at birth. And as sooner as you can get the colostrum to the calf, the better it will be. And so, again, we use the acronym ASAP. We need to get that colostrum into the calf right away as soon as possible after birth. And then the quantity, we suggest a gallon of colostrum. And some producers tell me that is just too impossible. They just won't take that much. And I think, again, we'll visit about how it is if we can try to get this gallon in. And keep in mind, the quantity may change a bit depending on the quality. And so we'll visit about that as we move into the next few slides. This slide here talks about the average immunoglobulin levels in Holsteins and Jerseys. And again, it's been said often that Jerseys have higher quality colostrum, and that is correct. The average would be about 66 grams of immunoglobulins per liter, and for Holsteins, it's about 50. And again, the important part to point out here, there is a wide range. So what is the actual quality of the colostrum on a particular dairy farm? We can use the average, and we can look at it, but are we really determining what the quality is? There's going to be several issues that will depend on how good that quality is. And we talk about disease exposure. The older cows tend to have a little bit higher amount of immunoglobulins in their colostrum because they have been exposed to more diseases, they're older, and the origin of diseases on the farm versus if you purchased a heifer and she has not been exposed to the disease factors on your farm. Vaccination status, we'll let Dr. Wallace visit about that. And certainly, are the cows leaking? Are they prepartum leaking? And if they're doing so, we're losing that high quality, that very valuable colostrum. And the last point there, pounds of milk produced. Dr. Wallace always shares with me his 18-pound rule, and that means if you milk more than 18 pounds of milk from that first milking of colostrum, that quality of colostrum will be diluted, and therefore will have lower quality. So again, the more milk that cow has in that first milking, the perhaps the lower the quality will be. Well, let's then go to the next slide, and that shows a colostrometer. And it's interesting, in our last round of dairy days, I was visiting with a number of producers throughout the state, and very few producers in Illinois have a colostrometer or use a colostrometer. And so again, we can use averages, we can use the look of the colostrum being thick and creamy, but do we know for sure what the quality of the colostrum is? And so a colostrometer really works well. And I think everyone is familiar with the program, but basically, the colostrometer is going to measure specific gravity, and if it's in the green, if it floats up and you can see the green mark, that's good quality colostrum. That's 50 grams or better of immunoglobulins per liter. If you see the yellow, if it floats into the yellow part as shown on the right of this here colostrometer, it's going to be average 20 to 50 grams. And if you see the red, boy, it's just something that you just probably don't want to worry about using in order to get good immunity to the calves. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the amount of colostrum, the quantity, certainly will depend a bit on when do we get that first amount to them. As the PowerPoint shows, the calf needs to absorb about 100 grams of IgGs in that first 24 hours. And so if we can get them to take the colostrum 2 hours, 1 hour after birth versus 8 hours or 12 hours, it will make a big difference as to how much quantity or how many quarts of colostrum the calf should have. We know that we will have reduced absorption of that colostrum into the blood immunity system of the calf the longer she is born in that first 24 hours. It's called that closure, that gut closure, the passive immunity. Again, we talked about the variation in quality based on age and origin, and also the delivery method. Nursing seems to have a better absorption of colostrum, the suckling of the bottle, and then perhaps the tube will have to be used if we need to get more colostrum into the calf that the calf will not certainly take in on her own. It's interesting to note that on the average, about 25% of that colostrum antibodies will be absorbed over the 24 hours on the average. But if we talk about 1 hour from birth, that could be up maybe 33, 40% versus down to probably 5 and 0% at 23, 24 hours of birth. So again, the importance is to get the colostrum into the calf as quickly as possible. Here again is a little data put together by Hugh Chester Jones, again reported at the 203 four-state conference up at Dubuque. But again, it shows the importance of decreasing mortality by increasing the amount of colostrum that calf receives. Now, this is talking about the percent mortality in the first week to 6 weeks of age. And so if I can get 4 to 5 quarts of colostrum into that calf in that first feeding, I will reduce my percent mortality a lot quicker than, or a lot lower than if I only can get her 1 to 2 quarts of colostrum. Again, so we look to see what are our dairy producers doing throughout the United States. And going back to the NAHMS report, we're looking here at the 207 data. Doesn't look much different than the 207, doesn't look much different than the 1996. And so one could suggest, well, we're not doing much changing, but yet I think it shows that about 40% of these calves are hand-fed in that first 24 hours, and that they get greater than 4 quarts or 4 quarts in that first 24 hours. And I think that's, again, very important because we talk about how we can decrease our mortality by increasing the amount of colostrum. Well, let's talk, if we can. I think the next 3 slides here will discuss a bit about how much is really needed. And I think, if you remember, I mentioned earlier, the better the quality, the greater the absorption, perhaps the less quantity we can get by with. As a rule of thumb, I think it goes pretty well to say, let's give them 4 quarts immediately or as soon as possible after birth. But you can see, if we have a high quality, 75 milligrams, we're using the assumption, 75 grams per liter of immunoglobulins, which is very high for Holsteins, and certainly if we can get it to them as soon as possible and get about a 33% absorption rate, well then 4 quarts would be enough in that first 24 hours. So if that's the case, if you're there when the cow calves, you know you've got high quality colostrum because you've tested it or you've already had some pre-tested and frozen, you can probably get by with 2 quarts. But keep in mind, the further you get away from that birthing date, birthing hour, the less absorption perhaps, and of course, the greater the chance of maybe not getting enough absorption. So here we're talking about maybe feeding 4 quarts immediately, and that's kind of the rule of thumb that I like to suggest. And then if we go one more, the next slide here talks about if you get poor environmental conditions or you really don't know how good this colostrum is, and we're still making the assumption that it's good colostrum. However, we're getting late into the first 24 hours, so our absorption rate now goes down to 25%. You can see very quickly that we need to start adding a lot of colostrum in that first 24 hours. Well, the question I get then from time to time, what if I don't have good quality colostrum? What if I'm concerned about disease spread with my colostrum? What do I have out there? And certainly we can look at colostrum supplements and replacers, and they still would, in my opinion, would suggest that I would want to use my maternal colostrum as my first choice. However, I can move into the supplements or replacers to come into play if I don't have enough colostrum or enough high quality colostrum. We have to keep in mind that a replacer, a colostrum replacer, is a better product than a supplement. A supplement can be used to boost your calf immunity, but it's not a replacement for colostrum. Whereas a replacer is higher levels of IgGs than your supplements, and your replacer then can be used as a true replacement for colostrum if in fact you are concerned about the spread of disease such as Johne's, and that is a very major concern. And so if you're concerned that you don't want to provide colostrum from the dam, you may want to try a replacer. The replacers and our supplements are going to add your cost to raise the heifer. Replacers will run probably about $25 to $30 per calf more because you have to purchase that replacer. Supplements are probably about $10 to $15 per calf. People then also suggest, well, what about milk versus milk replacer as we start talking now about the liquid diet of our calf? And we've got colostrum to them. We've got good quality colostrum. We have the calf off to a good start. Now I come in with my liquid feeding program, and people are suggesting, I'm going to feed milk or I'm going to feed milk replacer. Which is the best? I'm not suggesting that there is a best out there. I certainly would suggest that there are reasons why people would want to do one over the other. And I think we need to compare the economics of it. If you're familiar with the Penn State spreadsheet to compare cost of milk versus milk replacer, right now, if you look at that spreadsheet, it's suggesting that you need to have milk priced under $18 in order to feed whole milk, or what I call saleable milk, as compared to a $65 bag of high quality milk replacer. So again, we need to take a look at what's the comparison of, do I buy high quality milk replacer or do I feed my saleable milk? Another note to consider, certainly when we talk about the advantages of one over the other, milk brings in a value of what I would maybe visit soon here as an accelerated type of a feeding program. Milk replacer, you can buy an accelerated milk replacer, but people suggest that they like milk replacer because they can get better disease control. They have better consistency of the product, calf performance. And again, if we look at the need for some anti-coccidial or antibiotic type health to the calf, we'll want to probably go with a milk replacer because that provides that in there as well. So again, as we look at the differences, should we do one or the other? It certainly will depend on the grower's interest. We take a look at the NAHMS data one more time yet, and we look at, based on the NAHMS data, about 2 to 3% of the milk is not marketable, and that's what we call our waste milk. Now, waste milk will be a little bit different topic here shortly, as what I just conferred as the saleable milk. And we also see on the NAHMS data that about 56% of producers will be using milk replacers. Along with that, though, they'll be feeding some waste milk as well. So now we start to suggest, how are we going to feed waste milk and milk replacer? How do we do it without upsetting the animal? What's the transition, et cetera, et cetera. There's no doubt that there are some heifer growers, and maybe there's some heifer growers online that we can visit with, that purchase waste milk from producers up and down the road, and they'll bring that in, and it certainly can be a cost saver on the liquid feed cost, maybe up to 70% reduction. So again, waste milk has a really neat concept and need as far as trying to reduce the economics or reduce the cost on the dairy heifer. Well, the next item comes up, then if we're talking about waste milk, what about that disease transmission risk? And I like to suggest here that we want to discuss the idea of pasteurizing waste milk, and some producers are getting into that scene, that management plan, but certainly there are some pros and cons of pasteurizing as well. And as you can suggest here, there are different types of pasteurization. There's what's we would call the HTHT, the high temperature, or HTST, high temperature short time. This is really a form of what I call continuous flow pasteurization. It works well. It has a good kill off of the bacteria, and it is something that larger heifer growers or larger producers would tend to use, other than the opposite, which would be the low temperature, long time, and that would be more of a commercial batch pasteurizer. You can see, as on my slide here, we talk about the high temperature short time, 160 degrees Fahrenheit, short time 15 seconds. We will see a reduction or a killing off of our immunoglobulins, our antibodies in our colostrum. And that's a big, big negative. And so we do not suggest pasteurizing colostrum. We just don't have enough research to support the need to do that. But on waste milk, we're good with it, with the high temperature short time, or if you have a smaller operation, you could go with the low temperature long time, which is probably like a little bit slower, but yet perhaps a little bit less expensive. Might comment again, about only 1% of operations are using pasteurized milk, and so it's not something that is caught on very well, but yet you also can tell the larger herds are the ones that are using it because of the cost. I visited with a producer about 3 weeks ago. He's got 100 calves on milk at all times, and he purchased a $15,000 commercial batch pasteurizer, and is happy with it, but again, $15,000. Well, the last slide that I'm going to talk before I bring Dr. Mike Hutchins on, and that is just to introduce a bit. I want Mike to visit with us a bit on the nutritional aspects of our both our pre-wean diet, talking about the conventional versus accelerated feeding program, and that means we're talking about versus a 20% crude protein milk replacer, we're looking at a 26-28% milk replacer. And so what are the advantages as far as improved growth, and certainly what are the advantages on increasing or decreasing feed cost? So with that introduction, Dr. Mike, I'm going to bring up the next slide, and this is where we're going to turn it over to you to discuss a bit on the calf growth.
David, very good. Hopefully you're hearing me okay. Let's go to the next PowerPoint, Dave, if you can. And coming up with accelerated growth. We're going to go through this modestly fast, but I'm going to challenge you just a little bit about it. This program has caught a lot of flack in the last 4 or 5 months because of its cost, meaning you'll see here in a minute $50 to go on the program or more, and you're not going to recoup that for 2 years. And so when you're trying to stay in the dairy business, this one has got some challenges. Anyway, pretty straightforward, isn't it, guys? We're looking at about twice as much gain, twice as much solids going into the calf. That's that's important. You'll see in a minute. The key thing that Drakeley's data, Illinois, point out, these calves are actually structurally growing. In fact, they are actually leaner. They are leaner calves on the accelerated program than what you're going to find on a milk-fed or conventional program as far as that goes. The power is its tremendous growth potential. You look at average daily gain, or better yet, feed efficiency, accelerated calves just blow them away because by and large, remember, I always got that maintenance cost, regardless if it's a high-producing dairy cow or a baby calf, I've got to take care of. And so I have tremendous efficiency built in at this stage of the game. The last point's the big one. And that's the one you want to think about, and that is Dr. Drakeley uses the word setup. In other words, these heifers may actually produce more milk in the first lactation. We're going to come back and visit that here a little bit later, but that's a key question. So while all the first 4 bullets are important, to me, number 5 is the one that would be on the exam saying, can I program my calf through nutrition that she's actually going to produce more milk in her first lactation? And the number is around 1,100 pounds of milk. So David, let's go to the next PowerPoint and look at why you are feeding more dry matter. Now, this is a very busy slide, but I highlighted a yellow and orange line. The yellow line is 1 pound of average daily gain. And you can see that these calves are going to be eating somewhere around 1.5 pounds of dry matter. That'd be 1 pound of powder that Dave talked about a bit earlier at this stage. A very conventional type program as far as that goes. If you're feeding like 10% of a calf's body weight, you actually are going to be a little bit less than that. You're going to be more in that 1/2 pound rate as far as that goes. Then you can see, according to NRC 2001, that would be the absorbable protein grams per day and kilocalories of energy, metabolizable energy to get that gain. If you go down to the Fighting Illini orange color, now you begin to see by going to that higher level of dry matter what kind of gain. So you can see my gain goes up to almost 1 kilo. In fact, it is 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds there. And notice Dave's comment about the protein tracks up with that. So obviously that has to go hand in hand. So the question is, are you going to be on the orange line, or are you going to be raising heifers on the yellow line, or perhaps even slightly less than the yellow line? David, the next PowerPoint we can go to then shows some work from Jim Drakeley's lab here, showing these gains and performance. The green line, obviously, Michigan State line. Sorry about that, Philip. Anyway, you can see a much more higher rate of gain. So these animals really gain quite a bit more. Will the yellow ones catch up? Well, it depends on how you feed these heifers after you take them off the first 8 or 10 weeks as far as that goes. That's been one of the problems we've seen here in the Midwest, is that the yellow calves catch up with the green calves. But don't forget the first point. Are those green line calves programs produce more milk, even though size-wise you may not see them? Our farmers tell us you can see them in the pens if you've got some raised conventional versus accelerated. David, the next PowerPoint, if we can go to, then we'll look at guidelines. And these are a little bit of a Hutchins twang to it. Dr. Drakeley might be a little nervous about it. I've got 2 pounds of milk solids. I'm going to stop. I'm going to cap my accelerated calves off at 2 pounds of solids, because at week 3 or 4, them little buggers are going to be hungry and they're going to eat more calf starter. And that has been one of the real challenges. If you raise them much like a veal calf, where they can consume 3+ pounds of solid, then these calves eat very little starter. And then when we wean them, a bit of a challenge in terms of calves stalling out, actually potentially losing a little bit of weight at this point, makes them pretty open for disease challenges, cocci, and things like that. Davis pointed out your feed tags will look quite a bit different. The protein is higher, and the fat actually sits usually around 15 or 20%. Dr. Drakeley suggests that if you're looking at the optimal ratio of amino acids to energy, about a 26 protein all milk and a 15% fat is nearly ideal ratio. 20 now, if you get in some of these cold January, February, March days that we see here in the Midwest, the extra fat is always going to be a plus. Remember, these are all feed tag values rather than dry matter values that we have listed on the screen. Don't forget about Dave's pasteurized whole milk. You can do accelerated program very nicely with whole milk. You can see it'll run, if you use the typical 3.2% total protein number on whole milk on Holsteins, that's a 25% protein diet. And so does it surprise you to say, a lot of our producers say, you know, when you feed whole milk to calves, I think they grow a little bit better than when you feed milk replacer, that's a 20 or 22% protein. And the answer is, yeah, that's a pretty good observation. Notice, however, the fat content can almost approach 30%. So actually look at the caloric to amino acid or protein ratio, the accelerated program at 15 is more ideal. In other words, these little calves either are going to be exposed to more cold weather and burn those calories up, or they're going to look at some of your speakers on the conference call. They're going to be a little well-rounded as far as that goes. So again, you can use whole milk if you want, and as Dave points out, with today's milk price, guys and gals, you can almost be on the accelerated program cheaper using pasteurized whole milk than you can with milk replacer. You heard his other comments earlier. The calf starter, and some people will click it up just a little bit, but you know, if these calves are eating 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds of calf starter, an 18 or 20% tag will perform very well. I know some feed companies, as part of the program, will click this up to 22 to 24% tag, and certainly that provides more protein. So if you're trying to maintain that same high level of protein after you go off the milk or milk replacer solids, then perhaps you want to adjust it a little bit higher. I know one company in Tennessee actually uses fish solubles as their source because they think it has a better amino acid profile, and they actually market that very aggressively. So there's the bottom line. I think there's 3 questions you have to have. Number one, do you want to feed the 2 pounds of solids? Because that's where you got to be. The true accelerated program will go free choice. You need to have at least an aggressive milk calf starter that's at least 20% protein, and there's your bottom line question. And that is, are you willing to put $50 bill on the table today, here in April of 2009, and just realize that it may be another 19 to 22 months before I can maybe capture that 1,100 pounds of milk and the margin that goes with that. So let's go to the next PowerPoint if we can, David. And that is going to show my second point, and I'll wrap up here. So we're leaving the accelerated program. Guys and gals, I'm recommending it. I think it's a technology that in the long run is going to work well for us. We now have, looking at these growing heifers and accelerated growing programs for the older heifers here, and the theme is fat heifers. This slide put together by Pat Hoffman, it's a great slide. I'm not going to walk you through it. It shows 4 different body weights up there. One of the powerful ones is your next line, the dry matter intakes. Now that's a question many of you dairy farmers or educators or consultants need to look at. Are your heifers getting these kinds of dry matter intakes? Because then the rest of the numbers compute very nicely. You can see the protein dynamics here. You can see these 300-pound heifers, 17% protein. So again, for many of us, they come into a much lower quality feeding program at this point. You can see the UIP, DIP, or RUPs rather, numbers there, and there's your TDNs. Now you watch that, because that number comes up next. Notice as these heifers get older, the TDN number goes down, or the energy, metabolizable energy, goes down because of the extra dry matter intakes that's occurring, and that's one of our problems. So David, going to the next PowerPoint, you're going to see, again, that's coming from Pat Hoffman, looking at that same table now set up a little different way. He's got, there's your weight, your TDN requirement. Then he's looking at a 50-50 corn size, alfalfa size. That could be alfalfa hay, that could be pasture, that could be bales, anything. A 50-50, pretty good quality. And that's one of our challenges now, David. You've done way too good a job getting forage quality produced on farms. We don't have heifer hay anymore. And as a result, you can see that at 300 pounds weight, those forages cannot carry the mail. I needed some type of a heifer replacement or a heifer feed in there, a heifer replacer type program in there. You can see at 600 pounds, these have a pretty nice nutrient profile. Obviously, I got to supplement with my various additives and micronutrients and minerals as far as that goes. But now look at the older heifers, and he's got that alternative feed, and that would be such things as straw, could be corn stalks, could be soybean stubble, might be a little generous on this one, but certainly looking at a very bulky feed ingredient. And if we're going to go free choice to heifers, letting them eat their 24, 26 pounds of dry matter, we've got to come in with at least 15 to 25% of what we call an alternative forage. So David, going to the next PowerPoint, we come into looking at the key, and that is looking at these limit feeding programs, and this is my last PowerPoint. So here's your challenge. I don't want to get fat or heavy heifers. Bigger challenges, because many of these heifers now are on confinement housing. They don't go to pasture in the summer. They're not getting a lot of exercise in lots. They're pretty much in-house confinement, because we can control manure, we control runoff a little bit better. Second of all, we got these excellent forages that we just talked about earlier. And third of all, we say if I can somehow reduce some of those costs, my feed costs go down, and it's some case manure production goes down. Now, this is where this seminar will stop pretty much. You've got about two choices. Number one is you can limit feed the heifers. Pat Hoffman and Judd Heinrich at Penn State has some wonderful numbers on that. Pat Hoffman, of course, is from the University of Wisconsin Marshfield. And what they simply do is that we're going to limit how much animal feed the animals get. In most cases, these animals will have consumed this limited feed intake in 2 to 3 hours or even less period of time. Notice in big yellow signs that says you got to maintain the same levels of grams of protein, grams of minerals in there. So you got to develop a very specific program. This is tough to implement on a farm. So the other one came from South Dakota, which is known as the distiller's ration, and that is we're going to bulk this up with something like cornstalk straw or even a low quality grass if we have available on the farm or we're willing to purchase that. And we're going to bulk it up with, Pat Hufford would say, that filler feed, and then let those animals eat free choice. And a lot of guys like that because you don't have to have much bunk management going on. You don't have heifers bellowing as far as that goes. And some of you registered folks, they love the heifers, big, deep-ribbed, big-bodied heifers as far as that goes, very popular. So David, that completes my part of the program. I'll turn it back to you and go on to the next phase.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate those comments, and we can certainly visit more on Q&A a little bit later on. I'm going to move into another topic here as we talk about managing the replacement herd, and that is concerning grouping heifers. You'll note that we are not getting involved in talking about facilities, types of facilities, space requirements, but I do want to have one slide here just to discuss a bit about grouping heifers. Mike has already alluded to the importance of grouping heifers so that we don't get them over fat. We get them to grow properly, and that certainly goes to the feeding program and requirements. There's another whole issue here about how do we handle these heifers as we take them out of their individual calf hutches or individual calf pens after weaning. There's got to be a social factor. They have to learn how to bunk feed. They have to learn how to find themselves around. But yet we don't want to create a crowded situation where the competition is too much. So my point here is to suggest that make sure your transition housing will be done in small groups, 4, 6, 7 heifers per group, and certainly make sure that those heifers are housed together based on size. And then we do look at the reproductive status. We always talk about the bred heifer pen and the open heifer pen, and it's important, again, to realize just the whole social factor of if we've got a group of heifers we're breeding, we want to make sure we got a lot of heifers showing some heat activity so it generates a lot of observations if we're going by visual observation. And then, of course, we want to certainly be concerned about our pre-fresh heifer group, make sure that we have proper nutrient requirements based on that as well. So that's the point I want to comment there briefly on the group housing or the grouping. I want to get now into basically talking about what's your management on the dairy farm. How do you know you're reaching your heifer goals? And we talked earlier about the 1.7, 1.8 pounds of average daily gain for those large bred heifers, and of course that would be 1.4 or so for my Jersey breeders out there. But again, how do we really know that we're meeting those goals? And our goals, again, would be something in the point of what percent of mature body size. It's so important in my mind that we talk about size versus age. Again, I remember a number of years ago, we did a heifer hustle program in Illinois where we actually went out and measured and taped and weighed and monitored heifer growth. And we'd have heifers that were weighing 900 pounds or 875, and the producer says, I'm not breeding them yet because they're not old enough. And I say they're big enough. So let's go to it. So again, size is what I want to suggest here. And again, these are some of the rule of thumbs that I think fall pretty well in the line as you're monitoring your heifer program. Well, again, I talk with producers. I say, you folks have to get out there. You have to tape your heifers. You have to scale your heifers. You have to use the altitude stick to see the size at the point of withers, et cetera, et cetera. And they say that's easier said than done. You can say that, but it takes time and labor. But again, I suggest that collecting heifer growth data is an important aspect of our management program. And so again, we can do this at birth very easily, weaning very easily. And then after that, if you've got a vaccination program that you need to do there, perhaps at 6 months, Also, breeding time would be another time that you'd restrain the heifers. There's times that you can get this job done. And more so than just do it, I think it's important to record it, have a computer interface, have your book in your pocket, whatever the case may be, to record your body condition scores and your weights and heights, so that you can come back and view the next slide here, which is a very familiar slide to most everyone. This is the Penn State heifer calf and heifer growth chart. You need to have a tool like this. And again, we won't dwell on that particular chart, but the next chart coming up also, you need to have a tool that says, how are my heifers doing in comparison to the average? And so again, if you have a chart like we're showing here, again, sourced out of our Raising Dairy Replacement NCR book, it will tell me at 10 months of age, are my Holstein heifers at 650, 630, 660? Are they in that ballpark? Or are they still stalled out somehow? We really need to take time to observe these growth measurements, and we can know that the heifer is big enough to breed at that, in order to get a calf in at that 23, 24 months. Well, I want to now touch on perhaps something that really gets a little bit unnerving for a lot of producers, to really take a look at what does it cost to produce my heifers. What does it cost? We used to talk about, well, $1.50 a day, and before that, maybe we talked about 80 cents a day for feed. You can see on the screen some of the newer data that came out of the University of Wisconsin Extension Study. And again, I credit Pat Huffman from University of Wisconsin and his colleagues and extension staff that helped him collect all this data. 49 herds were observed in Wisconsin in the 2007 year. And the average cost to raise those replacement heifers from birth to 3 weeks, as you can see, was $1,643. Now, that is a cost of $230 per day. Folks, we used to say $1.50 a day, and non-heifer growers would say, I can't do it for that. And certainly we can see some of the numbers here will document that. The point that needs to be made, though, throughout the next 3 or 4 slides on economics and individual averages costs, the point that needs to be made is that every herd owner will have it different. Every heifer grower will have a different number. You really need to know what your number is for your herd. We can look at averages, and we can make recommendations based on averages. But as Dr. Mike referred earlier, it depends on your feeding program. Are you using byproducts? Are you using some feeds that perhaps are able to cut down some of the costs? That will make a big difference for us. So again, we look at the cost of raising heifers. The big cost on a daily basis, as you can see, comes in that birth to weaning. And it's interesting to note, our major cost in that $5.31 based on the Wisconsin survey, the $5.31 per day, half of that almost comes from labor and management. Does that make sense? You bet it does. You're going to have to pay somebody who's really good at observing listless calves that maybe are droopy-eared, scouring, et cetera, that takes a lot of time to do that. And so again, if we start to say, what is it worth to have somebody raise my calves, that first 6 weeks, 8 weeks birth to weaning will be a very heavy cost on a per day basis. And again, look at the range on feed cost. The average, $1.83. Are we going to use the accelerated milk replacement program that Mike talked about? Is that going to add cost? You bet it will. Are we going to use our own waste milk that we can maybe even buy from neighbors that will reduce the cost? Yes, it will. So again, it's nice to look at averages, but unless you can really zero in on your own farm, you really don't have the whole story, or the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. The next slide here talks again the cost then from weaning until 3 weeks prior to calving. Again, using the Wisconsin data, we're looking at certainly a lot lower labor cost. Labor management has dropped down to very, very little. And so you can see our major cost now comes into feed cost. And again, there's a wide range from 62 cents to $1.92. And we can very easily cut back or raise that value of feed cost depending on what type of feed products we're using. So again, as we start to put this whole puzzle together and we see that our costs are going from $5 as a baby calf up to an average of $2 on these heifers from weaning to 3 weeks prior to calving. You also will have to understand that when we get those calves up in that last 2 months prior to calving, we're probably looking around 2.5, 260 per day because of the added feed cost that they would have. And so again, we look at this here last slide that I'm showing here on the economics, and then we're going to bring Dr. Wallace online. The last slide shows here again, based on the age and how those heifers grow, 15 months, the feed cost averages $1, 21, 22 months, it averages $1.58. And so I'm going to bring this point home at the end when we summarize to suggest we need to get our heifers calving at that 23, 24 months so we don't have this $2.5, $1.50 for feed plus other costs, $2.5 per heifer per day, and by not getting them into the milking herd soon enough. So with that, and I know we're moving quickly on some of these numbers and we can come back and visit, I'm going to introduce Dr. Dick Wallace, our extension dairy veterinarian with the College of Vet Med, and everybody knows Dick Wallace. Dick, do you want to take over and do some visiting here on herd health?
Okay, thank you, Dave. I don't know if you've noticed, there's been a few questions that have come in, and maybe this is an opportune time to at least talk about them, because if we're talking about infectious disease control, one of the questions that came in from Yi Chong was about pasteurization, and can they just boil the waste milk? And my comments there would be boiling at that temperature, you're probably going to denature the proteins, and then you're going to have problems with absorption of nutrients in the calves. But certainly you can use what's called a longer time, a 30-minute pasteurization process, but bring the temperature up to about 145 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 63, 65 Celsius, and heat it. While you're stirring it, it has to be stirred, so it has to be consistently heated for 30 minutes. Just a comment there. And then there was another question about IgG levels. If you don't know, can you just feed more colostrum? And yeah, certainly I think if you look at Dave's numbers, what we're trying to get is about 100 grams of IgGs absorbed in the calf, and feeding more to the point where the calf's intestines and stomach can handle it. I guess that can work, but sometimes you can't get enough with poor quality colostrum, so always starting with good quality is important. So the other thing we need to think about, after we get past the point of feeding colostrum to prevent disease, is that looking at a strategic and effective vaccination program. And really what we're trying to do there is raise the level of resistance to diseases, infectious diseases, in the herd that you have. And the final point down there is making sure that we're protecting the resident herd. And the intention there is to make sure that if you're bringing new animals into the herd, that you aren't going to have problems with the animals that are already there. So heifers that are already on the farm should be well vaccinated to prevent new animals from bringing disease into them, and then vaccinate the new animals as well after they've had some time to acclimate to the new farm is important. David, we can move to the next slide. And go ahead and punch through all these bullet points. I'll tell you when to stop. A couple more. And one more. There we go. Okay, so to define what a strategic and effective vaccination program really needs to be done with your herd health veterinarian, someone that understands what diseases are prevalent in your area, customize it based on what the needs of the farm are. If you're looking at a heifer grower operation, you need to make sure you're contacting the home farm to determine what are their needs as well. So you can't just grab some vaccines and think you're going to do an effective job. It has to be based on really what's prevalent and what is necessary. I definitely avoid the once-a-year herd vaccination approach. It seems very simple to get all your vaccines out and just blast everybody at one time. But that's not a strategic program. Strategic, we try to base it on what the age of the animal is, if we're looking at vaccinating based on reproductive events, those kind of things. So one of the things you can use, Dave mentioned heifer monitoring and heifer growing and monitoring heifer growth. Well, if you're going to be vaccinating them and having them caught up for that time, perhaps that's an opportunity for you to collect some measurements at vaccination time. Handling vaccines is very important. Nearly all of them are meant to be refrigerated up until the point of use. And we even actually put ice bags in with our vaccine as we're going out in the summertime If it's going to take us a half an hour or an hour to do all the vaccinations, we try and keep the vaccines cool as we're working through it. So put them in a styrofoam container. Follow the label directions. The companies that approve these vaccines, they do them under certain specific recommendations, and so those directions are important. I don't know that we really need to rotate vaccines. I think most all vaccines out there now have, if you have the antigen in it that you're trying to attack. So I'm not too certain that we need to rotate vaccines. And the last thing is to make sure to remember that no vaccine is going to be 100% effective at preventing disease or preventing the animal from becoming infected. As a matter of fact, some of them are not even labeled for that. They're just labeled for reducing the severity of disease. So be very cognizant that vaccination is not the gold, the silver bullet to solve all your disease problems. Dave, let's go on to the next slide. And we need to talk about primarily the two different types of vaccines that are out there. There are vaccines that are called killed vaccines, and then there's other ones that are called modified live, which I'll talk about here in a second. The killed vaccines, typically there's many virus or many antigen particles, but they've been inactivated or killed by some process. And then what happens when you inject that into the animal, the antigen mass or the viral particles triggers the immune system. And so the companies put enough antigen in the dose to create an immune response, basically. Most killed vaccines need to be repeated in 3 to 4 weeks. They also provide shorter-term protection and probably are going to need boosters every 3 to 4 months, and one dose is not protective. And then we'll contrast that to modified live, Dave, if we can go to the next slide. Modified live, typically there's fewer virus particles within the dose, but they're alive. So in other words, when you inject it into the animal, they're going to replicate or multiply within the animal once they've located the target tissue. But these virus particles have been altered so that they don't cause disease, and that's what the modified portion of this is about. The altered live virus then will replicate within the body until it creates a critical antigen mass that triggers the immune response. So we get to the same point of the killed vaccine with the modified live, but we get to it through infection of the cells with this altered virus. So antibodies typically are longer-term protection, and if antibodies are produced by that vaccination, typically no booster is required. Now, the thing we can't guarantee is that an animal has been boosted and it's adequate. It's about as close to natural infection as possible without actually causing disease. Let's go to the next slide, Dave. And go ahead and pop through these. Why do vaccines appear to fail? Well, maybe we're injecting an animal a vaccine. It's not going to guarantee, just because you inject it into an animal doesn't mean you're going to get immunization or an immune response. Sometimes we can have extremely virulent field strains that will override or do what the vaccine can do. If cattle are immunosuppressed, if your heifers have poor nutrition, for example, their immune system is going to be compromised and they're not going to respond to the vaccine. Sometimes people try to use vaccines for conditions they're not designed for. And to a certain extent, the traditional 5-way lepto vaccine, for example, is not designed for reproductive failure, although we use it for that condition. One dose of killed vaccine, I already mentioned that, without a booster is probably a wasted event. Too long a time between boosters because we need to use the anamnestic response of the animal to try and kick in that immune response. And then the maternal antibodies that come from colostrum that Dave talked about is important, but if there are enough antibodies residual within the calf system, it's going to prevent a modified live vaccine from working. But we've actually seen some new data that says that some modified live vaccines will work in the face of maternal antibodies. Go on to the next slide, Dave. And just some final thoughts on vaccinations. It really needs to be incorporated into a herd health program, but if you don't have good management processes in place, good ventilation, good housing, good nutrition, vaccines are really not going to have as much benefit for you as possible. We need to resist the temptation to overemphasize vaccine as the solution, as I mentioned, the silver bullet, because no vaccine is 100% effective and it's no good it's not a substitute for good management. Back on to you, Dave.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Wallace, and certainly appreciate your expertise that you bring to this webinar with your comments on the vaccination program. As you can see, we're getting close to wrapping up here, and I've got 2 slides here yet to comment on before we open up for question and answer. And certainly, I predict, or I suggest that we need to talk about milk production as a function of size rather than age. Even though my title says calving at 24 months, maybe I should say calving at 1290 post-calving or 1400. But the point I want to make here, we really need to be thinking about our total management program from the young calf colostrum program all the way through vaccination, all the way through their breeding, to get the heifers into the herd, milking herd, at 23, 24 months of age. And certainly that will lower the rearing costs that we have in those heifers. I had made the comment earlier about we're probably looking at about $2.50 a day total cost on these heifers in that 23rd, 24th month. So if we have to go 25, 26 months before we can bring them into the lactating herd, we're looking at another $75, $76 a month, or $150, $160 for 2 months. And so again, and we need to suggest we're going to need less replacements if we can give the calf at an optimum time. Certainly, again, if we look at 26, 27 or more months, we'll need more heifer replacements. And the bottom line is that we still need to look at longevity and getting the calf, a heifer, a good start. Look at the increase in milk produced per day of life by bringing them in at that 23, 24 months of age. And so in summary, and this will be my last slide, in summary, I think we just need to recap the QTQ of colostrum management that we talked about, taking time to actually measure heifers, to determine their growth rate, to make sure we could make the right management decisions, as Dr. Hutchins talked about. What type of feeding program? Do we need to up it? Do we need to decrease it? Do we need to change it? And we can know that in a better tune if we have good monitoring program. Dr. Mike also indicated, do we want that extra 1,100 pounds of milk on those first lactation cows if they're put through the accelerated calf nutrition program? Not a bad idea. And the bottom point, have to realize that as everything costs continue to go up, other than our investments on the stock market, but other than that, I should suggest here that we have to make sure that we understand what our costs are on our farm versus just looking at the averages. Averages are good, but let's make sure we know what our costs are, and perhaps our costs have not gone up 31%. Maybe it's only 20, but the bottom line we need to know. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we want to suggest that we'll open up for questions here. Dr. Mike and Dr. Dick are online yet as well, and so let's open up for questions. We'll start taking a look at, and while we're doing that, I want to put back on the screen this slide that's promoting and informing you of our next webinar, which will be held on May the 1st. Dr. Dick Wallace will be the lead presenter, and Mike Hutchins and I will also be with him, starting here at 12 noon to 1 o'clock, a similar program as we've done with Dr. Hutchins on April 8th and mine, or in last month, and mine today. There is a URL that you can go to sign up if you're interested to do so. So with that, it's about 2 minutes or 3 minutes until 1 o'clock. Let's open up for questions. Let's see here, Dr. Wallace, have you, there's a question here, should I be concerned? Yep, okay, should I be concerned about mycoplasma in herds commingled and heifers commingled? And Dr. Wallace already answered, he says yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, if I just can add in there, mycoplasma can be spread from nose to nose, aerosolization from calves that have it to other calves that don't. So if you have a herd that you're getting calves from that potentially has mycoplasma problems, boy, that's a tough one, because commingling animals on a heifer ranch from two different farms is really a tough thing to keep separated. So, Mark, I would, yeah, if there is mycoplasma, you're going to need to try and there's really no vaccine or anything you can do except for improving ventilation and some of those things. But it definitely would be a concern of mine if I had different herds that were commingled.
Okay, thanks, Dick. Appreciate that, and certainly open for other questions here yet, as you're maybe thinking about typing some in. I want to comment that as you sign off on the webinar today, you'll probably see a quick survey that will be sent to you. We encourage you to take 2 or 3 minutes to complete the survey, giving us some guidelines as to what you don't like down the road, what we're doing. Is this something we should do more often? So again, as you sign off, we encourage you to look for that brief survey. Take a couple minutes to fill it out. Anything
David,
else?
David,
Yes.
we have one quick question while you're serving the other ones about the pasteurized milk, and the answer is yes, you are correct. If you're going to use whole pasteurized milk, you would feed 2 gallons. That's going to achieve about that 2 pounds of dry matter. Again, you may have to take a week or so before your calves will consume that higher level, but the answer is yeah, exactly right. If you can get 2 gallons of milk in that, then you would be in the accelerated program using pasteurized milk as far as that goes. And I think Dr. Wallace responded to the other one. Yes, you still get excellent gains if you limit feed. The key is you're limiting dry matter intake and not nutrient intake. That's the key, and that's why the heifers get fat, and that's why they still grow. In fact, Huffman's data would indicate at this point if anything, there's a slight trend for more milk in the first lactation on those heifers that were fed 80% of the dry matter intake compared to 100% of the dry matter intake. That was not statistical, but that's one of the questions farmers say, well, do they give less milk? And Huffman's data would say, if anything, there's a trend they give more milk, and that pretty much reflects what fat heifers do in the transition period and some of the metabolic challenges they have.
Good point. Good point. We still had a couple of questions that came up. I think they're pretty much answered. Someone asked a question about culling, determining how to cull heifers, and of course that certainly has, and Dr. Wallace made a comment, but it certainly has a factor. Are you trying to build the herd internally, or are you trying to keep the herd at a certain pace? What else do we have here, guys? Am I missing a question or so?
Oh, there's a question that came in, Dr. Wallace, you may want to comment on, and that had to do with, Jim, it just disappeared here. The calf bar. No, there was another.
Yeah, I did comment on the calf bar as far as letting the calves consume. If you think about what a calf would do if the cow was in the pen, or what a beef calf does, is it consumes maybe 11, 12 meals a day. And so that's what we're seeing with these calf bars, as long as they're not getting infectious diseases from them. So, yeah, self-feeders tend to work pretty well. The calves will grow very well with the self-feeders.
There is also another system out of Europe in which is just like electronic grain feeders on milk cows, which the calf carries an ID, and then they are limited on how much milk you want to program for that calf. So that's another approach. I know this mob approach with the milk bar is more of a New Zealand concept, but there's a couple different versions out there. And the kids saw some of these in New York State 2 weeks ago, and they thought they were working well. These are the ones that were actually with the ID system on the neck of the calf.
Very good.
There's a question in there about group pens and nursing calves sucking each other. What they've seen actually with these mob pens, if you want, as long as there's a opportunity for the calf to go drink milk, they don't tend to suck on each other. It's more of a problem when you wean a calf and they're used to having milk more often, and then they go find a pen mate to nurse on. So it tends not to be as big of a problem.
Okay, very good. Other questions were, okay, Dan, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I just saw the question on acidified milk. I don't know if Mike wants to answer on that one.
Well, basically, the acidified milk is a European approach, and that data, Daniel, looks pretty good. Ed Jaster did some work here at Illinois as well. Seemed to have less scour score associated with it. There's more cost associated with it. These are organic acids, so they're not going to eat up your pails or anything like that. So I don't see much play in a Dick or Dave at this point, but the research says it's there, and they work equally as good as the other. There might be some health advantages. Dick, any other comments, or Dave?
My comment is I guess some of the folks up at Cornell have done some work with the acidified milk and finding really good gains, and a good way to preserve some milk for a little longer for feed out.
Very good. Okay, looking at, looks like we've got the questions all pretty much answered here. Anything else yet that we can, any wrap-up thoughts, Mike or Dick, before we end up?
No, just again reinforcing the evaluation, the survey. We're at a very interesting juncture here at Illinois. I wanted to know, should we continue these? Should we continue them on a staggered basis or on a monthly basis, or do we give up on it? So your comments are very critical at this stage of game. You can pretty much control where we go with this technology here, at least in the dairy sector.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike, and Dick, thank you for your time to be with us as well. Most importantly, thank all of the attendees who spent their hour and 15 minutes with us. We really appreciate your time. I think with that, seeing no other questions coming in, we'll sign off if that's acceptable. Thank you all. Have a great day.